I wanted to share a few things just in follow-up on the message from Sunday. I felt like it was one of the finest potlucks I can remember having recently in my life. And so if you weren't able to be at the meeting on Sunday, I highly encourage you to listen to both Sandeep and also Arnaldo's and Stanley's messages. It was really encouraging how the Lord stitched those things together. And as I was reflecting on them, there are a few things that stood out to me that I just wanted to mention. Because there's so many things that in what we heard on Sunday that represent a paradigm shift in how we conventionally think about our faith. And I thought it was worth just kind of double clicking on a few of those things because they're so important. The first one is when Sandeep, he in a sense, he de-emphasized Bible study and blessing, which I thought was very good. He talked about that the focus on Bible study can basically be very close to Eastern mysticism. I wrote down this quote: if we think that long walks with God and meditating for hours on God's word are what it means to seek God's face, then we're not that far off from Eastern religion. And that's a very challenging quote. And there are a lot of areas where we have to redefine our words. And one of the areas I've noticed, which is related, but is this idea of rest. You know, it says in Hebrews 4 that there remains therefore a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And it's easy to define rest, if we're not careful, in terms of outward peace, in terms of if I get to listen to the ocean, if I get to see a sunset, if I get to watch a dolphin. I'm not being sarcastic. You think about nature, right, is restful to the world, and yet we can say if we think about rest, is it quiet in my home? If it's not, then it's not restful, right? And we can have these wrong definitions of rest. And even in Christendom, there's an emphasis on Sabbath. You know, a lot of churches, I don't know if you know this, but they emphasize taking a Sabbath and a day per week that you don't do any work or things like that. These are Christian churches. And that completely obviously, as we know, it misses the point of what Hebrews 4 speaks of when it says that there remains therefore a Sabbath rest for the people of God. You can just look at Jesus' miracles, you know, the number of times he worked miracles on the Sabbath to know preserving a day where we don't work is not the intent of the Lord in emphasizing a Sabbath. And to me, the best picture, and yet, even though we don't emphasize a Sabbath, we can still have the wrong definition of rest. And the picture that came to my mind as I was thinking about rest is the picture of Peter walking on the stormy sea. And what spoke to me was, if you look at that story, the storm is still raging. Jesus didn't calm the sea, but he invited Peter by the power of God and in obedience to the command and the call of Jesus Christ to triumph over the raging sea. And to me, that was a wonderful picture of the inward rest. When it speaks of a Sabbath rest for the people of God, it's not that our outward circumstances change. It's that the Lord enables us to triumph despite outward circumstances. So that was the first thing I wanted to mention. The other thing that I wanted to mention is in regards to difficulty. Sandeep said that we may see God in blessings and in Bible study and things like that, but where we should seek God is in difficulty. And I was just reminded of the story of Job and how the Lord, you know, as we've heard, possibly the first book of the Bible written as far as we can tell. And what did the Lord want to do? He wanted to show a man whom he considered to be righteous. And what did the Lord how did the Lord deal with someone whom he considered to be righteous? He allowed the enemy to test him. And for what purpose? That the Lord in his trustworthiness and his goodness might be put on display, that he might be able to say, you know, have you seen my servant Job? And I was just thinking about the difficulties, as we heard on Sunday from Sandeep, that in a sense, difficulties are the Lord's invitation. He's wanting to say to the enemy, have you seen my servant Jeremy? Have you seen my servant? Put your name in the blank there. Have we seen that it's a tremendous compliment, in a sense, when trials come our way, that the Lord is seeking to be able to say to the enemy, have you seen my servant? He wants to point us out, not primarily point us out. He wants a mirror image of himself, as we heard. He wants to be able to point out his goodness, his trustworthiness. As we heard, not that somebody is praying in the Colosseum for deliverance from the lions, but that they're at rest, and that would demonstrate the trustworthiness and the wisdom and the love of God in a way that even an angel shutting the mouth of a lion doesn't demonstrate. And every single difficulty that we face, there's a fundamental question that I've noticed in my life, which is God on the throne? Who's on the throne right now? And I've learned in my walk with the Lord to delight in the opportunity to proclaim by faith. I believe that the Lord is still on the throne. I believe that he's perfectly loving. I believe that he's perfectly wise. I believe that he has plans for my good. And the time to insist upon those things, it says that, I think in Colossians 3 verse 10, maybe it says that there's that, or maybe Ephesians 3:10, he wants to have a testimony on display to the rulers and the authorities in the heavenly places. He wants to, and so to me, the stage we're playing on, it's not just about the testimony that we make. Ephesians 3:10, I'm sorry. It's not just the testimony that we make to human beings, but that there's a testimony we're making to rulers and authorities in the heavenly places, that we are declaring the manifold wisdom of God. And there's a unique opportunity that we have to do so in the midst of trial. But that being said, I wanted to also mention a couple of other things, because it's important to recognize the difficulty, to identify the right difficulty. When we say that Jesus is knocking on the door of difficulty, what does that mean exactly? And it's been helpful for me to realize that the important difficulty isn't the circumstance, it's the temptation in the circumstance. I realize it's a subtle distinction, but it's worthwhile. For example, the difficulty isn't my difficult boss. The difficulty that's important, the operative difficulty and the opportunity to declare the goodness of God, is my temptation to be resentful of my difficult boss. The difficulty isn't my hard child, it's the temptation to be impatient with my hard child. It's not my uncertain future, it's a temptation to be anxious about my uncertain future. And all those things, to say the difficulty that Jesus is knocking on the door of is the temptation in the circumstance. And the opportunity I have is to take up my cross and to fight the temptation, not to fight my hard boss, but to kill my temptation to be resentful. Not to fight my hard child, but to kill my temptation to be impatient. Not to resent my uncertain job situation, but to kill my tendency or temptation towards anxiety. And all of those things, I see that the primary difficulty is as we've heard, the great enemy is our flesh. The flesh is hostile towards God. It doesn't subject itself to the law of God, as it says in Romans 8. It's not even able to do so. And those who set their minds on the Spirit are putting to death the deeds of the body. And that's the difficulty. It's not the circumstance. It's the temptation that I'm experiencing in the circumstance. And to recognize that, I find it's very important. And I want to highlight one other important aspect, that is, we don't seek difficulty, we seek God's face. And that's a very important distinction. Just as it's a mistake to seek God's blessing and thinking God's there, or to read the Bible and think God's there, it's a mistake to be seeking difficulty too. Definitely, Jesus Christ is knocking on the door of difficulty, but what we want to seek is Jesus. We don't want to seek difficulty, we want to seek Jesus. And it's important to recognize that we can start to delight in difficulty. It says in Hebrews 12 that Jesus, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He didn't enjoy the cross. He endured the cross, but there was a joy set before him. And when we hear, as we heard on Sunday, that Jesus is knocking on the door of difficulty, I'm not greeting difficulty. I'm greeting Jesus Christ. It's Christ that I want to seek. And I read a quote the other day on Twitter or something. As we heard, the danger of an Eastern religion mindset of enjoying sunrises or long walks or warm coffee with the Lord rather than the Lord himself. We can also have a twisted, in the world, there's an appreciation of trials. Like I read something to the effect of that a great artist or a great writer's job is to take the difficulties of their life as a gift that they can form into their art for people. So are Christians unique even in their attitude towards difficulty? Actually, no. Artists also welcome difficulty, but we're unique in that we aren't obsessed with the difficulty or the story we get to tell. We are longing for Jesus Christ. So just like we see meditation and quiet time, things like that can be awfully close to Eastern meditation, so also can a love of trial. And what the Lord put on my heart is I want to only love trials to the extent that to which that they reveal the face of Jesus Christ. Meaning it's not the trial I love, it's Jesus that I love. It's not for the sake of a story or the art that I can make. It's for the sake of the nearness of Jesus Christ, to the point even where the trial is forgotten, but the face of Jesus Christ becomes more radiant. And I was blessed. I want to just point in closing to one example of this that I see in Jesus in Mark chapter 1. It really blessed me to see this because I don't know, I'm perhaps reading into it a little bit, but in Mark chapter 1, we see the testing of Jesus in the wilderness. Mark chapter 1 and verse 12 and 13. And one of the things that really touched my heart is it's only 2 verses, the 40 days in the wilderness. Look with me, Mark 1, verse 12. Immediately the Spirit impelled him to go into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days being tempted by Satan, and he was with wild beasts, and the angels were ministering to him. That's it. That's all it says in Mark chapter 1. We know in Matthew, there's like 11 or 15 or 13 verses dedicated to the 3 temptations, and same in Luke, there's a bunch of verses dedicated. But the thing that really blessed me here was to see, I mean, I've heard, or the history tells us perhaps, that Peter may have dictated the Gospel of Mark to Mark. And Peter, we know, is very close to Jesus. And I feel in the emphasis or de-emphasis, if you will, that Peter placed on the temptation in the desert, I feel I learned a little bit of something from someone who was particularly close to Jesus about the heart of Jesus, which is this. Peter didn't feel the need to emphasize all the details of the trial. And I mean, I've benefited tremendously from the example in Matthew and the details. We learn there that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word which proceeds from the mouth of God. Very useful details there. Same in Luke. But there was something that was special to me in Mark chapter 1. And what I took from it was Jesus wasn't obsessed with the details of his difficulties. And it spoke to me about, I don't want to be obsessed with the details of my difficulties either. And if you put me on the spot to give a testimony, what is the theme or the chorus of my testimony? Is it the details of my difficulty? You know what's amazing here is in Mark chapter 1, we don't even know Jesus is fasting. Matthew and Luke do mention he fasted. Here, the fasting's not mentioned. None of the details of the trial are mentioned. But what is mentioned? Uniquely, angels were ministering to him. And I wonder whether when Jesus gave his testimony, so to speak, to Peter, and he's just talking one-on-one with him, he didn't trouble himself with all of the details of it. Certainly Matthew wanted to keep a fastidious record. That's great. Luke, the great physician, wanted to get all details right. But Peter, the one I'm close to, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about my trials. What I want to emphasize is God was there. He strengthened me. That's the theme of the song. And for me, it was a good challenge because, again, what do I love? Do I love trial or do I love the strength of God? What we see here is, if you look with me at Mark chapter 1, in the context, or at least in the section in my Bible, verses 9 through 13, in verse 9, it says, in those days, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee, was baptized by John in the Jordan. Immediately coming out of the water, he being Jesus, the perspective we're taking here is Jesus' perspective. Jesus saw the heavens opened and the Spirit descending like a dove. He saw that. And a voice came from heaven, not saying, this is my beloved son, but you are my beloved son. In you I am well pleased. So we've got Jesus' perspective here. He sees the heavens open. He hears the testimony of God to him. And then immediately the Spirit impelled him to the wilderness. No details about the fasting or the trials, but the angels were with him. And the thing that I took from all of this is Jesus wasn't so concerned with his own sacrifices or with the details of the difficulty. He was most focused on God's love and leading and strengthening through the trial. God's love. I saw the heavens open. I heard his voice, his leading. It's his Spirit who impelled me, and his strengthening. He sent angels to help me. Never mind how long I fasted. Never mind the details of the trial. The theme of my song, the wilderness song, so to speak, is God's love and leading and strength. And that's how I want it to be for me too. I remember in Psalm 136, we don't have to turn there. You can look there some other time, just for the sake of time. Every other line is, his loving kindness is everlasting. And I thought that's the chorus of that psalm is loving kindness is everlasting. Let the redeemed of the Lord say is loving kindness, all these things. But the theme of Jesus' song in the wilderness wasn't the details of his trial. It was the faithfulness and the love and the leading of his Father. And I thought, I want to be that kind of disciple. I don't have to tell you all the details. The important thing, brothers, if I can tell you anything, God was with me. He sent me. He reminded me he loved me. He strengthened me. And I want that to be the theme of my song too. And so just in closing, I would really encourage you, go back and listen to those messages from Sunday. All that I've tried to share tonight is just building on some of the things that we heard. But I really feel that the Lord spoke an anointed word to us on Sunday, and it blessed me to reflect on it a little bit more. And I want to have the Lord's definition. I want to have the Lord's focus and emphasis. I want to view trials in the right way. I want to view blessings in the right way. And I don't want to be so caught up, even as much as I cherish the knock of Jesus on the door of difficulty. It's not the difficulty I want to be taken up with. I want to be taken up with Jesus. And when I go to share my testimony, I want the theme of my song to be the love and leading and strengthening of Jesus, not the details. Not that we don't tell them. We may tell them to the Matthews and Lukes, and there's a time and a place, and it's an encouragement and a blessing. But in my heart, I feel we see something in Mark, that the theme in my heart is not what I've been through. It's what I learned of God, how he helped me, how he supported me. And that's what I want to be the true part of my heart, regardless of what I say. That's what I really want to be the joy and delight of my heart, as it seems like it was for Jesus. So I pray the Lord would help us, and that he would really help us be, as we heard earlier tonight, new covenant disciples who emphasize the things that the Lord emphasizes, who seek the things the Lord encourages us to seek, who hate the things that the Lord hates, and who don't get so caught up in the things that are peripheral, that aren't the main point. I believe that he wants to do that more and more in our lives in the days ahead. I pray that he would finish the work, bring it to completion before the Lord returns. Amen.